morning. My name is Sandy Perronne, and I'm a lifelong member of St. Mark's UCC in Cleveland, Wisconsin. Our reading this morning comes from Hebrews 11, verses 1 through 13, and verses 39 through 40. It speaks of faith. To have faith is to be sure of the things we hope for, to be certain of the things we cannot see. It was by their faith that people of ancient time won God's approval. It is by faith that we understand that the universe was created by God's word, so that what can be seen was made out of what cannot be seen. It was faith that made Abel offer to God a better sacrifice than Cain's. Through his faith, he won God's approval as a righteous man because God himself approved of his gifts. By means of his faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. It was faith that kept Enoch from dying. Instead, he was taken up to God, and nobody could find him because God had taken him up. The scripture says that before Enoch was taken up, he had pleased God. No one can please God without faith, for whoever comes to God must have faith that God exists and rewards those who seek him. It was faith that made Noah hear God's warnings about things in the future that he could not see. He obeyed God and built a boat in which he and his family were saved. As a result, the world was condemned, and Noah received from God the righteousness that comes by faith. It was faith that made Abraham obey when God called him to go out to a country which God had promised to give him. He left his own country without knowing where he was going. By faith, he lived as a foreigner in the country that God had promised him. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who received the same promise from God. For Abraham was waiting for the city which God had designed and built, the city with permanent foundations. It was faith that made Abraham able to become a father, even though he was too old and Sarah herself could not have children. He trusted God to keep his promise. Though Abraham was practically dead, from this one man came as many descendants as there are stars in the sky, as many as the numberless grains of sand on the seashore. It was in faith that all these persons died. They did not receive the things God had promised, but from a long way off they saw them and welcomed them. Verses 39 through 40. What a record all of these have won by their faith. Yet they did not receive what God had promised, because God had decided on an even better plan for us. His purpose was that only in company with us would they be made perfect. My message today is entitled, Finding God Before You Need God. I bring you this message not from any theological studies, but from my heart to tell you my story of how I found God. 3 years ago, when Pastor Bill retired, I knew there were many roles to fill at this church. As I have done in the past with teaching Sunday school, leading the children's Christmas programs, doing special community projects with the Sunday school, serving on consistory, and being what I can remember as the first female consistory president, I knew there was another task for me to fulfill. You see, Pastor Bill in his last years was doing a lot of the planning for the youth events. With my youngest daughter Emma being 14, I knew I wanted her to have a good church experience. One that would make her want to continue to be a part of this congregation years after the time she would be making her own decisions to or not to attend church. All too often, we see the youth drift from the church after confirmation as they pursue work, school, travel, and relationships. I wanted Emma to hold a connection to us, the congregations of St. Mark's and St. James UCC. If I, as her parent, didn't take on that role, how can I expect someone else to give her the experiences I wished her to have? It's called parenting. My motives also had an underlying desire for her to believe in something bigger than just a church building, a Sunday morning ritual, or an obligation to make her mother happy. I wanted her to find God before she needs God. Don't get me wrong, I want the same thing for my other 3 children, but they're grown and making choices in different cities with new people in their lives. I wanted to do this for Emma and teach her that church is not about sitting in a pew, filling the offering plate, or getting frazzled over some minor changes that happen in the routine of church. I wanted her heart to be open, kind, and helpful, something we need to see more of, especially in our current times. So along with Carrie Langenhan, we've done our best to try to engage our youth in activities to reach out to our communities with making the tie blankets and pillows, bringing puzzle books to the homebound, nursing home, and assisted living residents, making soup for persons with needs, and sharing a dinner with residents at Bridgeway House. It's a big task to plan, organize, fundraise, shop, and complete such projects with the added duties of being a full-time employee, wife, mom, and a caregiving daughter. Last fall, Carrie and I had the opportunity to talk to the Joint Consistories about hiring a youth leader to help with the planning as we both fulfill the roles of wife, mom, daughter, and full-time employee. We shared that while we want to help in the role of youth coordinators of the church, our other life commitments challenge our time to do everything at its best. Basically, we went to them stating, we need help. During my words of persuasion to them, I uttered my goal for our youth, and hopefully to all who attend church, to find God before they need God. So here's my story. During my childhood, my dad played dart-ball with Ed Heckman, a few other members of our churches, and members of Faith UCC, a small church that used to be across from the old Menards store, about where Gander Mountain used to be in the town of Sheboygan. Our families would gather, we'd have a great time watching the team, and hence I have known Bill Heckman since I was about 6 or 7 years old. Great family, fun to be around, and always look forward to seeing them. Bill, playing football at Kiel High School, played against Larry from Sheboygan Falls High School. Oh, they shared this great love-hate relationship when I began dating Larry. Falls and Kiel are long-term rivals, you see. Well, high school ended, and I went off to UW-Milwaukee to study occupational therapy, and there I met a great friend in OT school whose roommate just happened to be Lori Van Versi. Lori was from the Kiel area and was dating Bill Heckman. Well, what a small world that I would meet someone who was dating a guy I knew since I was a little girl. A great guy at that. Lori studied medical records administration. I studied occupational therapy, and so we had many classes in the same building. A year or 2 into school, I began commuting to UWM and was lucky enough to be able to crash on her sofa every Tuesday night to save the drive home at 9 p.m., only to return to Milwaukee at 8 a.m. the next morning. A few years later, we both lived back home and commuted together 2 days a week to Milwaukee from the Kiel and Sheboygan Falls areas. After school, this beautiful friend of mine married Bill Heckman, and we both started working at Sheboygan Memorial Medical Center, and all was good with the world. Until January of 1992. Lori was traveling home and was hit by an oncoming car on Dairyland Drive. She was sent to a Milwaukee hospital, and the next day I was at work, and my boss came to find me to say somebody was there to see me. Well, Bill had come to the hospital to speak to Lori's coworkers and then found me. We sat in the medical staff lounge as he shared with me that he let her go earlier in the day as her brain would not recover from the accident. We sat, cried, talked, and eventually I went back to work. Well, this was my first major life crisis as an adult. As a child, I had lost 3 grandparents, an infant brother, but my memories of those times had faded quite a bit. This was now very real to me, and I needed a way to ground myself. I needed God, and for me, going to church was an obvious choice. Over the years, I have since been a regular church goer and doer. I knew that there I could bring my heavy thoughts and share them with God. God didn't judge. God didn't tell me what to do. God didn't expect anything. God just gave me the chance to find some peace and hope. I found that having something to believe in, a higher power who's overseeing the events of our lives, is reassuring, and it's sometimes puzzling. The events we face just honestly don't always seem fair. I don't understand why young people I have known have died. I don't understand why my law enforcement husband has to be in the roles of a parent, social worker, funeral director, and a disciplinarian, and yet he and his peers are often criticized for all they do to uphold the law. I don't understand why my children's workplaces are vandalized by rioters in the Twin Cities. I don't understand how a global pandemic starts from one person. I do know that my faith in God sees me through these events. Faith that there is a lesson to be learned or a good thing that will happen in the long run because of these struggles. It makes me strive harder to be a good person, to be a helper to others, to go with the flow, to be kind, and to have a stronger faith that God will provide. For without this, what else do we have to guide us? I see my faith grow stronger with the little coincidences of life. When church members volunteered at the last moment to help with our Habitat for Humanity project, when the request list for an outreach project is filled with donations, when the rainbow in the sky is beautiful after a forceful storm, when one of my patients cancels and frees me up on a day when I was swamped and had no time to catch up on my paperwork, when the car breaks down a week before a big trip away from home and not during the trip, when a nurse asks for some input on a personal medical issue from a rounding physician with a listening ear and he solves the medical mystery that 4 other doctors couldn't do, when your son brings a friend to be a guest to your daughter's wedding and ends up proposing marriage to her several months later, when you gain a new best friend with another Lori Heckman and the beautiful children that her and Bill have created, when your husband and Bill have put their football differences aside and now have a friendship where they would do anything for each other. I have learned to call these moments God winks. I borrowed the term from a book, When God Winks, by Squire Rushnell. This is a book my daughter Alyssa purchased for me as a Christmas gift a few years ago. It chronicles short stories of how the power of coincidences guides your life. A woman goes to the Crystal Cathedral to pray to find the daughter she gave up as a baby, when a young woman sits beside her in the church. They find that they have found their lost mother and daughter in each other. Other stories tell of relationships, careers, and life events that have had signposts of divine intervention. We can probably all identify some God wink-like experience, but just said, oh, what a coincidence. I believe that at those times, God is finding us and allowing us to build faith. We need to find God in return. And when we find God, we give back to our church with our time, our talents, and our offerings. When we find God, we can give back to our communities to help others be nourished, cared for, and loved. We're currently living in some very dark times. I've always worried that my children's lives would be stricken with the social and medical issues we're dealing with today, and guess what? We're all in the thick of it right now. Our youth and our fellow church members need our guidance, our encouragement, and our positive behaviors to model after. We need to put aside petty concerns that frustrate those who might like to get involved with the church and instead appreciate God's drive within them. It's my prayer today that you all have a God wink to share about how you have or are finding God. For it's better to be prepared to find God before you meet